All set?
Yeah.
Right.
So.
Good. Okay. Right. Good morning. May I ask you to please take your seats? I call the meeting of the General Committee on Democracy, Human Rights and Humanitarian Questions to order. We'll start in 30 seconds. Okay.
Hello, Mr. Douglas.
Hello.
Nice to meet
Right, good. Okay, thank you for your help here. Okay, right, we're all set to go. Let me explain what I'm doing here. My name is Alf Dubbs. I'm from the UK delegation. And the reason I've been asked to take the chair this morning is because our chair lost, Serene Maubourne, she lost her seat in the recent French elections, so we thank her for the work she did for us and regret that she's no longer with us. Mr. Link, the vice chair, also sends his apologies because he's had to go to Berlin on urgent business. So although he took the chair yesterday at this committee, he's not able to do it today. The agenda for this meeting has been distributed. May I first of all ask you to adopt the agenda? Are there any objections to adopting the agenda? No objections? Right, okay. Therefore, the agenda is adopted. Does anyone wish to speak against the draft agenda? No. Right, it's been adopted. Thank you. Okay. So it's a pleasure for me to welcome you to this meeting. Before we begin, can I ask anyone speaking from a prepared text to hand that text to the Secretariat in advance? It really does help the interpreters in this way, and it'll make our meetings more productive and efficient. May I also remind you that the election of committee officers for the 30th annual session of the Assembly will take place during the committee's final session, which is likely to take place tomorrow, that is to say Tuesday morning. Nominations for candidates for election should be handed into the table office not later than the start of that meeting, that's to say by 11:30 on Tuesday morning. Now we're considering amendments, and we'll resume that. Yesterday we did 2 of the amendments, and we'll now resume consideration. 16 amendments in total have been tabled, and as I say, 2 of them have been agreed. Can I just make sure we're all looking at the right version of the amendments? The version, it's quite a complicated thing. The version is entitled AS22 DRS3 Amendment REV1, just to make sure we are talking to the same text of the amendments. And as I say, we agreed amendments 1 and 2 at the previous meeting. In discussing the amendments, I'll call the proposer of the amendment or amendments first, and then we'll call any one opponent of the amendment. I'll then ask the sponsor of the draft resolution, Mr. Buser, he's here, and thank you for that, for his opinion. And following that, I will put the amendment to the vote. May I ask speakers to observe a time limit of 1 minute, please. We will also require to vote on every paragraph to which there are no amendments, so that we adopt the whole document in that process. So let me turn to Amendment 3. May I call on Mr. Underhold from the United States to propose Amendment 3. Mr. Underhold, you have the floor. Are you here?
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my amendment, of course, deals with the attacks on the cultural property. They're much more than just destruction on buildings and artifacts. They're attacks on the identity, on the memory, on the dignity, and the future of an entire population. Under the international humanitarian law, parties to an armed conflict must protect and respect cultural property. Attacking cultural property or using it for military purposes is prohibited. Nevertheless, as of June 20, 2022, UNESCO has already registered 151 Ukrainian cultural sites that have been destroyed by Russian forces. This includes museums, historical buildings, libraries, churches, religious institutions, as well as damage to the Holocaust, another Holocaust site there in Ukraine. The scale of damage in the cities across Ukraine make it clear that it is not merely a collateral damage. Russian forces are targeting these sites as part of their assault on the Ukrainian identity. We must call Russia out on these actions and hold them accountable and responsible. I yield back.
Right. Thank you very much indeed. Does anyone wish to speak against this amendment? That's to say, against Amendment 3. Please indicate if you wish to speak against. Right. In which case, nobody's against. May I ask the rapporteur, Mr. Boozer, what his opinion is of the amendment?
Agree.
He agrees. Right. I shall now put Amendment 3 to the vote. Will those in favor of Amendment 3 please raise their voting cards? Thank you. Anybody against? Are there any abstentions? Right. One abstention. Okay. That is Amendment 3. Amendment 3 is therefore adopted. We will now take paragraphs 5 to 10 together. Does anyone want a separate vote on any of these paragraphs? Okay. So we will agree paragraphs 5 to 10. Right? Anyone against? No? Those in favor? Those in favor, please show. Paragraphs 5 to 10. Right. Any abstentions? Can't see any abstentions. Right. Paragraphs 5 to 10 have been agreed to. Now we turn to Amendment 4. Amendment 4, I call on Mr. Gallego from the United States to propose Amendment 4, please.
Yes, I'm Congressman Lloyd Doggett on behalf of Mr. Gallego, member of the U.S. delegation. We think it's important that this resolution, strong as it is, should specifically point to the continued efforts of the Russian Federation to sponsor disinformation in the OSCE region and, for that matter, around the world. The Kremlin, of course, is in total control of the media in Russia and has discouraged all foreign media and all independent media within the country, chasing journalists underground. It's a dangerous place to be a journalist. Some have even been imprisoned or killed for their work. And this leaves the Putin media with almost unlimited room to operate. This amendment draws attention to the fact that Russia's state media apparatus is a weapon of war against Ukraine. It propagates lies and attempts to influence other countries and its own people in favor of the Kremlin's aggression. I urge its approval.
Right. Thank you very much indeed. Does anyone wish to speak against Amendment 4? Right. And may I ask Mr. Boozer for his opinion?
Agree.
Mr. Boozer is happy. I shall now put Amendment 4 to the vote. Those in favor, please show with your voting cards. Thank you. Anyone against? Any abstentions? One abstention I can see. Right. Thank you very much indeed. Okay. So Amendment 4 is adopted. We'll now vote on paragraph 11 as amended. Anyone against? Right. Those in favor, please show. Right. Do we need voting cards? Yeah, we need voting cards for this. Could we have voting cards for this one, please? Paragraph 11. Please show if you're in favor. Right. Okay, thank you very much. Any abstentions? One abstention. Right. Paragraph 11 as amended is agreed to. We'll now take paragraphs 12 and 13 together. Does anyone want a separate vote on these two paragraphs? No? Right. So we will now move to amendments 12 and paragraphs 12 and 13. Those in favor, please show. You're happy? Yeah. Right. Anyone against? Is that against? No. Abstentions? Right. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. So paragraphs 12 and 13 have been agreed. Now we come to Amendment 5. May I call on Mr. Cohen from the United States to propose Amendment 5?
Good morning. I'm Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, and I'm a member of the United States delegation, and will be offering Amendment number 5 on behalf of Mr. Cohen. Let me proceed very quickly to say that we need to make it clear that the scale of destruction and human suffering that we've seen in Russia's war on Ukraine could not have been possible without the participation of Alexander Lukashenko in Belarus. In fact, I was at the Lithuanian-Belarus border getting briefed at the time in March and found that there were, or listened to the fact there were at least 40,000 Russian troops there at that time. Lukashenko has not just permitted the presence of Russian troops and equipment in Belarus, but allowed the Russian military to launch attacks from Belarusian soil on civilians in Ukraine. This amendment is a reminder that when the perpetrators of war crimes against Ukrainians are made to face justice, we must remember the role of Lukashenko and his associates, who are right now active co-conspirators in the Russian Federation's criminal conduct. It is for this reason that I ask for support of this amendment and ask my colleagues to support it.
Right, thank you very much indeed. Anybody wish to speak against? Mr. Boozer?
Thanks a lot, Ms. Jackson, for the proposed amendment. I have been discussing some amendments with several delegations, and it's about naming specific countries. And if you take a look into my report, as well as in the resolution, you can see that I've divided the sections into certain topics and themes. And therefore, I decided, firstly, not to mention specific countries in my report, as well as in the resolution. After the 24th of February, it was impossible not to mention the Russian war in Ukraine, of course. So that is something that we have clear statements in the reports, as well as in the resolution and in many of the proposed amendments. But still, I've told several delegations that mentioning more countries and put more countries into it, I will not do that. I will not propose to doing so because of there is a certain logic in the resolution. But that is, of course, up to the Assembly to decide if you want to do so. But I will not recommend taking in more countries into the resolution as it is now. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now you've heard Mr. Boozer's comments. I now want to put Amendment 5 to the vote. Will those in favor of Amendment 5 please raise their voting cards? Those in favor of Amendment 5. We may have to count these. Okay, can we? 18 between these two. Okay, right. Can you put your cards down, please? Will those against please show their voting cards? Those against Amendment number 5. One. Okay, and any abstentions? Abstentions on Amendment 5? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Okay.
6 abstentions, so it's passed.
6 abstentions, okay.
I want to just announce the vote.
Yeah.
I've got.
So the voting is
18 for, 6 abstentions.
no against.
Portugal both abstained and voted against. So
How do I?
could ask.
Okay, so that is clearly passed. 18 favor, 6 abstentions, and 4 against. Okay, clearly passed. So Amendment 5 is adopted. Right. We will now vote on paragraph 14 as amended. Anyone against? So those in favor of amendment paragraph 14? Yep. Anyone? Any abstentions? One. Okay. Right. Paragraph 14 as amended has been accepted. We'll now take paragraphs 15 and 16 together. Are you happy we take them together?
Somebody put their hand up.
Two abstentions? Yeah, no one opposed.
Okay. Sorry, that was on taking 15, 16. Okay, right. So nobody wants a separate vote on these paragraphs. So anybody against? Right. Those in favour of paragraphs 15 and 16? Thank you. Any abstentions? Right. Paragraphs 15 and 16 have been approved. Abstentions? 2. Right. Okay. Now we want to move on to Amendment 6. Oh, point of order?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to make a proposal for an oral amendment to be added after a new paragraph to be added after paragraph 16. It's a paragraph about considering the role of SMM and supporting SMM.
Okay, so the procedure, as I understand it, is that if an oral amendment has been proposed, then in accordance with paragraph 10 of Rule 22 of our Rules of Procedure, first I have to ask if there's any objection to the oral amendment being considered. Is there any objection to that oral amendment being considered? Well, we need to know the wording, though.
Yeah. Ask them to read out the text.
If I may, I can present.
Sorry, we need to read out the text of the amendment.
He'll do so. Yeah.
Will you do that, please?
Yes. So the text of the amendment calls on the Russian Federation to immediately release all SMM personnel remaining illegally in detention and to end the denigration campaign against SMM conducted by Russian Federation and its proxy.
Okay, right. Thank you. So, is there any objection to our taking that as an oral amendment now? No. In case, so if there's no objection, we'll then consider the amendment the same as any other. So would the mover of the amendment please speak for 1 minute, supporting it?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, I strongly believe that the SMM, with its essential role and extraordinary effort of the devoted personnel who is exposed to substantial risks, these teams and all the team members have the benefit of our full support, and we should strive to obtain their full protection. Consequently, I propose to add, after paragraph 16, the new paragraph that I just read. I could read it again. It's calls on the Russian Federation to immediately release all SMM personnel remaining illegally in detention and to end the denigration campaign against SMM conducted by the Russian Federation and its proxy. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against that amendment? Mr. Buzzer?
I agree with the oral amendment.
Amendment has been agreed by the rapporteur, in which case we shall proceed to the vote. Will those in favour of this oral amendment please show with your voting cards? I think that's probably, no, I think it's, anybody against, please? Nobody against? And any abstentions? I think that's it. Clear majority. So that amendment, that oral amendment, has been accepted. We now move on to Amendment 6, which is on the list of amendments, and I call upon Mr. Haidu from Romania to propose it. Amendment 6.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear and esteemed colleagues, we propose an amendment to the draft resolution as we have to say no to Russia's crimes against humanity. There are a huge number of consequences of Russia's war against Ukraine, unjustly violating sovereignty, independence, and human rights of this country and community. We believe that we strongly must condemn the mass killings in the cities of Bucha and Borodyanka, and also in other cities in Ukraine, because we sadly discover more and more horrors where the Russian army passed. The next step is to investigate these crimes and punish those responsible, and we have a duty to say it clearly. Russia and those acting on behalf of Russia are responsible for crimes against humanity also. Crimes against humanity under international law are murder, extermination, enslavement, imprisonment, torture, grave forms of sexual violence. when committed as part of a widespread or systematic attack directed against any civilian population.
Thank you. Does anybody wish to speak against Amendment 6? Anybody? Mr. Boozer?
I agree with the proposed amendment.
Rapporteur agrees with the amendment. We'll now proceed to a vote with voting cards. Will those in favour of Amendment 6 please show with your voting cards? Yep. Anybody against? Anybody against? Anybody against? Any abstentions? Right, that amendment is carried. Thank you very much indeed. That amendment was, of course, to replace paragraph 17 of the original text. I shall take paragraph 17 as defeated, and we therefore don't need to vote on it as that amendment has replaced it. Okay? Right. We are now...
Skip that bit.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, thanks. We're now on Amendment 7. That's in the name of Monsieur Lecomte of France. Would Monsieur Lecomte please propose Amendment 7?
Oui, merci Monsieur le Président. Mes chers collègues, la tragédie vécue par le peuple ukrainien nous oblige aussi à relever nos niveaux d'engagement vis-à-vis d'un certain nombre de points. Et c'est la raison pour laquelle nous proposons que l'ensemble des pays qui sont membres de l'OSCE s'engagent à adhérer à la Convention de Genève pour l'amélioration du sort des blessés et des malades dans les forces armées en campagne, Convention de 1949, et à la respecter, ainsi qu'à traiter dignement les blessés civils, à les soigner et assurer leur évacuation et à adhérer à la Convention, adhérer aussi les États de l'OSCE, adhérer à la Convention sur les mines antipersonnelles de 1997, la Convention d'Ottawa, et ainsi à la Convention de 2008, Convention d'Oslo, sur les armes à sous-munitions. Donc nous proposons que l'ensemble des États membres de l'OSCE relèvent leur niveau d'exigence et d'engagement compte tenu de ce que nous constatons aujourd'hui en Ukraine et qui mérite que nous prenions des engagements pour réélever nos niveaux d'exigence et que nous soyons exemplaires. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much indeed. Does anybody wish to speak against this amendment? In which case we'll now go to a vote. Those in favour of Amendment 7, please show with your voting cards. That seems okay. Hands down. And anybody against? And 2 against. And any abstentions? Right. Amendment 7 is adopted. We will now vote on paragraph 18. Is anyone against? Paragraph 18. Those in favour, please show. Okay, thank you. Any abstentions? Paragraph 18 has been agreed. We now turn to amendment number 8. Mr. Underholt from the United States to propose Amendment 8, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an operational paragraph that pairs directly with the preamble amendment I made earlier, just a few minutes ago. Russia forces are destroying the country's cultural heritage and historical sites in Ukraine, and it's clear from the scale and the pattern of the destruction that the Russian forces are targeting those sites as part of their assault on the Ukrainian identity. We must call out Russia on these actions and hold them accountable and responsible. Intentional destruction of a cultural property is a violation of the international humanitarian law and as such is a war crime. In addition, restoration of destroyed cultural and historic sites must be a part of any reconstruction plan in order to support and protect Ukrainian identity and its history. Future generations must be able to enjoy and use Ukraine's rich cultural heritage, to worship in historical churches, to visit museums and historical buildings, to use libraries and archives, and to express their unique Ukrainian identity and history. I would ask for support for this amendment, and I yield back.
Thank you very much indeed. Does anyone wish to speak against Amendment 8?
Pretty incredible, huh, Brad? They even targeted
Right.
a monastery that was still aligned with
Mr. Boozer?
Orthodox Church.
Agree.
Agree. Mr. Boozer is agreed. I shall now put Amendment 8 to the vote. Will those in favour of Amendment 8 please raise your voting cards? Right. Thank you. Will those against please show? Anybody against? Amendment 8. Any abstentions? Right. Amendment 8 is adopted. We will now turn to paragraphs 19 to 22 together. Does anybody want a separate vote on these paragraphs? Okay, so we'll now take paragraphs 19 to 22 together. Those in favor? 19 to 22, yes, please show. Right. Okay, any abstentions? Right, 19 to 22 have been adopted. We now turn to amendment number 9 from Monsieur Leconte of France. Would Monsieur Leconte please propose amendment number 9?
Merci, Monsieur le Président, mes chers collègues. L'action de la Russie en Ukraine, l'agression de la Russie en Ukraine, au-delà de tous les drames qu'elle provoque, est une atteinte à la sécurité alimentaire de l'ensemble de la planète, avec d'autres risques de déstabilisation engendrés, je pense en particulier suite à l'inflation et à l'absence de capacité de répondre aux besoins alimentaires, en particulier du Proche et du Moyen-Orient. C'est la raison pour laquelle nous proposons d'exhorter l'ensemble et de nous engager à nous abstenir de compromettre la sécurité alimentaire de tous les États et de condamner et de s'engager, de condamner les destructions de ce type d'infrastructures vitales pour la population, ainsi que les infrastructures de stockage alimentaire. C'est la raison de cette proposition. Je vous remercie.
Does anybody wish to speak against this amendment? Mr. Boozer?
Agree.
Mr. Boozer is happy. Thank you very much indeed. I shall now put Amendment 9 to the vote. Will all those in favour of Amendment 9 please show your voting cards? Right. Will all those against please show? Anybody against Amendment 9? Right. And any abstentions? Right. Amendment 9 is adopted. Thank you very much. Let's proceed. Amendment 10. Amendment 10, Ms. Karapetyan from Armenia to propose Amendment 10.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, human rights are universal. However, certain governments fulfill their obligations when they are called upon directly. With all due respect towards the position of the rapporteur not to address conflict contexts and name actors separately, I do reiterate that certain governments will react only if they are called upon directly. What are the humanitarian issues in the context of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict then? Prisoners of war. There are no Azerbaijani prisoners of war in Armenia, and Azerbaijan acknowledges this. Armenia has also handed over all of the landmine maps to Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan acknowledges this. There are still Armenian prisoners of war in Azerbaijan. This Parliamentary Assembly can call for their return. Next, missing persons. Both Armenia and Azerbaijan have missing persons from the first and second Nagorno-Karabakh wars, and both should continue looking for the missing persons. This Parliamentary Assembly can call for searching all missing persons. Finally, we're asking the OSCE to support the implementation of a UNESCO mission to the region to monitor the cultural heritage of the region. Yes, human rights are universal, but things move forward when there are political signals. Please do give a political signal. Thank you.
Does anyone wish to speak against Amendment 10? Yes, hands up. You have 1 minute, please. Yeah.
Thank you, dear Chair, dear Rapporteur, dear colleagues. Earlier today, in the First Committee, the Assembly took a principled position and rightly rejected confrontational narrative proposed by Armenia and voted in favor of normalization process between Armenia and Azerbaijan, resolving all issues peacefully through direct talk. Just 1 hour ago, EU Council President Charles Michel discussed with President of Azerbaijan on the phone Brussels' agenda for dialogue between two countries. He stressed the importance for the European Union of a stable, secure, and prosperous South Caucasus. He said that EU will continue to support our two countries in addressing humanitarian connectivity and border issues, as well as the future peace agreement. Peace and stability in the South Caucasus will be achieved through negotiations, not through one-sided amendments propagating selectively certain issues at the expense of other issues. For example, the proposed amendment doesn't acknowledge the issue of 4,000 Azerbaijanis who went missing in the First Karabakh War and the issue of heavy contamination of Azerbaijani territories with mines, which prevents Azerbaijani IDPs from returning to their homes. Thus, it takes a biased, one-sided, and non-comprehensive approach. The issue of the Armenian detainees must be addressed in due process without undue interference in accordance with the rule of law. It has been also confirmed by the European Court for Human Rights and International Court of Justice. As to mission to UNESCO, Armenian delegation passes over in silence that Armenia prevents this mission while Azerbaijan supports it. Dear colleagues, as our political leaders are engaged in sensitive but positive dialogue facilitated by the EU Council President Michel, we members of parliament should support this process and not damage it by voting in favor of this one-sided and completely counterproductive amendment. So I call on my fellow parliamentarians, as they did this morning, to vote against this amendment. Thank you, dear colleagues.
Good. Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Boozer, what's your opinion?
Thank you, and I will stick to what I said before regarding the amendment on Belarus. I will not recommend the Assembly to vote and name specific countries in the resolution, so I stick to that also for this one, but it's of course up to the Assembly to take a vote if it wants. Thank you.
Right. You've heard the rapporteur's views. We're now going to vote on Amendment 10. Those in favor of Amendment 10, please show with your voting cards. Those in favor of Amendment 10.
Do you get 11? I get a 10 total. Okay, 11.
Okay.
Against?
Those against, please show. You're going to have to count these, yeah?
I got 17.
Abstentions, please. Right. Thank you. Okay. I want to see this.
11 in favor, 18 against, 15.
Yeah, okay, the results are, we've counted them carefully, 11 in favor, 18 against, and 15 abstentions. So, that amendment has been defeated. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Now we want to move on to paragraphs 23 to 25. I'm told that there's going to be an oral amendment suggested. That'll come after paragraph 23, so we need to formally adopt paragraph 23 before we take the oral amendment. Right? So, does anybody against paragraph 23? Those in favor, please show paragraph 23. Right? Okay. And any abstentions? Okay. So paragraph 23 is adopted. We now have an oral amendment, okay? And again, let me remind you, the rule is that we're going to read out the amendment, and then if there's any one objection to it, the amendment falls, okay? Okay? Otherwise, we'll take it as a same as any other amendment. Is that clear? Okay? So we need to be sure we've got the wording right.
You want to give it to them to read it out?
Can we?
Yeah.
Well, shall I read the amendment? Okay. And that is in the name of, who's put this amendment?
It's quite hard to pronounce.
From which country?
Georgia.
This is from Georgia. Mr. I'm sorry, I apologize, I'm going to stumble on the name. Boccherishvili. Okay? And I'm going to read out oral amendment number 2. It's important we get this right. That is to be inserted as a new paragraph after paragraph 23. The amendment says as follows: condemns the deteriorated humanitarian and human rights situation in Russia-occupied regions of Georgia, Abkhazia, and Tashna Valley region, South Ossetia, as a result of violations of fundamental freedoms and human rights of people living therein. Various forms of discrimination against ethnic Georgians, as well as the obliteration and alteration of Georgian features from Georgian cultural heritage monuments in both regions, as a direct consequence of Russia's ongoing occupation and Russification policy. Now look, if I didn't read that very clearly, are you clear about the wording, or do you want me to read that again? You've got it up there on the board. Okay, everybody's happy that we've got an agreed wording that's there for the oral amendment, okay? Now, to remind you again of the procedure, if there is any one objection, we cannot take an oral amendment. Is there any objection to this as an oral amendment? I do not see any objection. Right, we shall then proceed to take this as an oral amendment. May I ask Georgia to speak to it for 1 minute?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear colleagues, as we discuss human security as a basis for European security, we should not forget roots of the challenges that we face today. Unfortunately, breaching the international law and the rules-based order have long been a marking of Russia's aggressive policy towards its neighbors. Georgia was one of the first victims of Russia's aggression and illegal occupation, in blatant violation of international law and commitments soon after breakup of Soviet Union and later in 2008. For almost 14 years now, each and every year at this very forum, we speak about the appalling, tense and highly volatile human rights, humanitarian security environment in Russia-occupied 2 regions of Georgia. Georgia remains committed to the peaceful conflict resolution policy and does its utmost to provide support to the people living in the Russia's occupied regions. The ECHR landmark judgment in 2021 clearly attested Russia as a party to the conflict, exercising effective control over the Georgia's integral regions and responsible for the human rights violations on the ground. In Russia-occupied Abkhazia and Tskhinvali regions, people are killed, some of them as a consequence of torture and inhuman treatment. The Russian-occupied regime-led so-called borderization process continues. Kidnappings and illegal detentions of Georgians have become lengthier and more outrageous. The Russian occupation forces continue to impose various restrictions, preventing the conflict-affected people in Georgia from access to their families, property, agricultural lands, religious sites, and cemeteries, as well as healthcare, emergency services, and education. While this is still happening, while conflict between Russia and Georgia is not settled, we cannot consider that we live in peace. We should not forget this, and Russia's long-standing aggressive policy against Georgia should be part of this message from the OSCE. So that I propose to consider amending this text of the resolution accordingly, not to create impression that bigger aggression can overshadow the previous ones and people suffered for decades because of Russian aggression are forgotten. So thank you very much.
Right. Thank you for that. Does anybody wish to speak against this oral amendment? Anybody? Right. We will now move to a vote on this. I'm so sorry, Mr.
Thank you. Thank you for your intervention, but this is the same logic as I told you about before, mentioning specific countries in the resolution, apart from Russia and Ukraine ongoing war, so that is why I do not recommend to do so, so thank you.
Right, you've heard the rapporteur's views. We'll now move to a vote on this oral amendment. Those in favour of the oral amendment, please show with your voting cards. Those against, please. Anybody against? Can't see anybody against. Oh, yes. Yes, two against. All right. Abstentions? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, the vote for 28 in favour, 2 against, and 8 abstentions. Thank you for that. We will now proceed to paragraphs 24 and 25. Are you happy we do it on one vote? Right, anybody against that? No? Okay, those in favour of amendments of paragraphs 24 and 25, those in favour? Thank you. Any abstentions on that? Okay, thank you very much indeed. So amendments 24 and 25 have been agreed. Thank you. Most of you are sticking to the 1 minute. 1 or 2 are not. Please do remember we ask you to speak for 1 minute. We now move on to Amendment 11 from Ms. Friedel of Switzerland. I call on Ms. Friedel to move Amendment 11.
Danke, Mr. Chair. Ich danke auch unserem Berichterstatter Johann Büsser, dass dem Kampf gegen den Menschenhandel in seinem Text einen so wichtigen Platz eingeräumt hat. Es handelt sich hierbei um eines der abscheulichsten Verbrechen. Menschenhandel findet oft im Verborgenen statt und ist schwer aufzudecken. So ist das Ausmaß dieses Verbrechens auch der breiten Öffentlichkeit allzu oft unbekannt. Wir Parlamentarierinnen und Parlamentarier haben deshalb die Pflicht, sicherzustellen, dass unsere Regierungen alles tun, um das Verbrechen des Menschenhandels zu verhindern und zu bekämpfen. Es ist auch unsere Aufgabe, die Durchführung von Sensibilisierungskampagnen zu fördern. Nur wenn die Bevölkerung besser informiert ist, kann sie Behörden oder NGOs alarmieren, wenn sie kriminelles Verhalten im Zusammenhang mit Menschenhandel beobachten oder vermuten. Besten Dank.
Does anybody wish to speak against Amendment 11? Mr. Buser?
Agree with the proposed amendment.
Right, we shall now proceed to a vote on Amendment 11. Those in favour, please show with your cards. Okay, those against? Those against, 1. Any abstentions? Right, that is carried. There is a technical point. At least one country is both abstaining and voting on an amendment.
Voting against.
And voting against. Please, you can't do that. You can either vote against, or vote in favour, or against, or abstain. You can't do 2 of those at the same time. So please amend your ways. Right, we now move on to Amendment 12. We now move on to paragraphs 26 to 28 together. Are you happy we take them together? Anybody against that? No. Right, those in favour of amendments 26 and 28? Thank you very much. Any abstentions? Okay, right, 26 to 28 have been agreed. We now move to Amendment 12. That is in the name of Mr. Hadiani of Cyprus.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank also Ms. Karimi from Netherlands, Markopoulos Gara, and Mrs. Senekis for the support of this amendment. I want to applaud the rapporteur for this excellent resolution, and this amendment is only meant to strengthen one small aspect. As special representative of civil society engagement, I follow issues in the NGO sphere very closely, and I thank the rapporteur for including good and detailed language related to the difficulties NGOs are having. With this amendment, I simply seek to strengthen some of the references and make it absolutely clear that NGOs are not only facing harassment, but are actually being entirely shut down. This is unacceptable, and we should say so. Thank you again to the rapporteur for this excellent report and the resolution.
Thank you. Does anybody wish to speak against Amendment 12? No. Right, Mr. Boozer?
Thank you, I agree.
Mr. Boozer agrees. Right, we shall now proceed to vote on Amendment 12. Those in favor, please show with your cards. Amendment 12, those in favor? I think that's okay. Okay, thank you. Those against? Anybody against Amendment 12?
Don't see anyone.
No. Any abstentions? One. Right, thank you. Amendment 12 is carried. As the amendment was to replace paragraph 29, I'll take it that paragraph 29 has been defeated, and therefore there's no need to vote on it. So that is clear. We're now moving to amendments 30 and 31. We'll take those together. You're happy? I beg your pardon, paragraph 30 and 31. Nobody wants a separate vote. Okay. Those in favor of paragraph 30 and 31? Right. Any abstentions? One, I think. Thank you very much. Paragraphs 30 and 31 have been agreed to. We now move to Amendment 13 in the name of Mr. Hadiani of Cyprus. Would you like to move Amendment 13?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, again. This proposed amendment comes from dialogue that I have been having with NGO representatives. Many of us have been active in election observation through the OSCE and know how important this can be. In my conversations with some NGOs, it became clear how much they appreciate the work that we do in the field of election observation. The intention of this amendment is simply to ensure that our political support for this important work continues and even gets strengthened. I hope you can all agree to this amendment, and thank you, and thanks again, Mr. Dunava from Romania, Invidia from Italy, Markopoulos from Greece, Gara from Greece, Wells from Canada, Senekis from Cyprus, and especially Mr. Link, who is all the time support for the follow-up of the election observation mission. Thank you very much again.
Right, thank you. Does anybody wish to speak against Amendment 13? No? Mr. Boozer?
Agree.
Right, he's happy. I'll now put Amendment 13 to the vote. Those in favor, please show with your voting cards. Thank you. Those against, please show. Anybody against? Oops. Right, any abstentions? Don't see any. Okay, right, Amendment 13 is adopted. We'll now take paragraphs 32 to 36 together. Are you happy we take them in one go? Together? Okay, thank you. Those in favor of paragraphs 32 to 36, please show. Thank you. Any abstentions? 1, 2, 2, 3. Okay, thank you. Paragraphs 32 to 36 have been adopted. We now come to Amendment 14 in the name of Ms. Posio from Sweden. Please move Amendment 14.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I was pretty clear yesterday and also in my amendment, but I would like to add another point that shows the hypocrisy that runs through the veins of certain politicians. They talk about the awful use of sex as a weapon in war and conflict. I could not agree more. It is an abomination.
But their solution is less sexual and reproductive health and rights, and preferably no proper sex education at all. Well, the thing is, consent sex is an amazing thing and can lead to wanted pregnancies and babies. But if you're never taught properly about equal, beautiful, fun ways of being together, it is easier to follow those old, disgusting, conservative patterns, which includes forcing yourself upon others. I truly cannot understand why some politicians are against people being able to know right from wrong, to have consent sex with whomever they want. So if you want a society that is equal for all of us, you should vote in favor of my amendment. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Does anybody wish to speak against Amendment 14? Right. Mr. Boozer?
Agree with the proposed amendment.
Right. Let us proceed to a vote on Amendment 14. Those in favor of Amendment 14, please show your cards. Right, I think that's right. Those against, please show. Right, and any abstentions on Amendment 14? Okay, Amendment 14 is adopted. Thank you for that. We'll now move to taking paragraphs 37 to 39 together. Are you happy we take them together? Thank you. Those in favor of paragraphs 37 to 39, please show. Okay. Any abstentions on that? Right. Paragraphs 37 to 39 have been agreed to. We now come on to Amendment 15. Mr. Cohen from the United States, please propose Amendment 15.
Sheila Jackson Lee, and I will be offering the amendment for Mr. Cohen at this time. As we consider some of the biggest challenges the world has faced in decades, I would like to draw your attention to an issue that underpins these challenges. The war in Ukraine, in many ways, has come about because Russia's Putin is an unchallenged tyrant. He's unchallenged because he's imprisoned or killed all of his critics and opponents. In Russia and its puppet state of Belarus, civic activists, political opposition, journalists, in particular, anyone who dares to say anything truthful about the regime faces detention and imprisonment, which makes them political prisoners. There cannot be any truth there. That is, their detention has been imposed by political motives. In Russia, nothing exemplifies this as the cases of Alexei Navalny, whose only crime is that he dared not die at the hands of Putin's henchmen, Vladimir Kara-Murza, Ilya Yashin, and many others. In Belarus, too, the U.S. Department of State estimates more than 1,000 people are being held as political prisoners. Some of them are well-known activists who simply oppose Lukashenko's illegitimate election. Many of them are there, swept up thousands. Putin will continue waging this senseless war until someone at home starts showing Russian citizens the ugliness of what their government is doing. We must support these individuals who speak against this despot and speak the truth. And as well, that will only be done when people are currently behind bars who are opposing Putin. I also mentioned Brittany Griner from the United States, an Olympian and WNBA champion who's been held now over 100 days as a political prisoner from the United States, and Paul Whelan. I ask my colleagues to support this amendment. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for that. Does anybody wish to speak against Amendment 15? Mr. Boozer?
I agree with the proposed amendment.
Right. We'll now proceed to a vote. Amendment 15. Those in favor, please show with your voting cards. Yep. Thank you. Anybody against? Are there any abstentions? Right. Amendment 15 is adopted. Thank you for that. We're now going to take paragraphs 40 to 42. You're happy we take them together? Okay. So those in favor of paragraphs 40 to 42, please show. Yeah. Thank you. And any abstentions on that? No. Paragraphs 40 and to 42 have been adopted. We now move to Amendment 16. Mr. Fessler from Switzerland to propose Amendment 16.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, dear colleagues. Ich begrüße die Aufnahme von Absatz 43 in den Text unserer Resolution. Diese Forderung ist für die Achtung der Rechtsstaatlichkeit und der demokratischen Grundsätze von entscheidender Bedeutung. Das internationale Recht lässt es zu, dass Regierungen zur Verhinderung oder zur Abwehr einer besonders akuten Bedrohung Maßnahmen ergreifen, die bestimmte Menschenrechte einschränken. Dies darf aber nur unter ganz strengen Bedingungen geschehen. Herr Buser erwähnt in seinem Bericht, dass solche Maßnahmen temporär sein müssen. Ich schlage mit meinem Änderungsantrag eine Ergänzung vor. Ich möchte, dass bei der Einschränkung von Menschenrechten auch die Grundsätze der Notwendigkeit und der Verhältnismäßigkeit zu beachten sind. Ich danke Ihnen für die Unterstützung.
Thank you. Does anybody wish to speak against Amendment 16? Mr. Busler?
Thank you, and thank you for the intervention, but I think I will recommend the Assembly to vote for the paragraph as it is, where the wording of including for public health reasons should be included, because we all have different experiences of the pandemic and of different measurements and restrictions, but I recommend to vote for the actual text in the paragraph and say no to the amendment. Disagree. Thank you.
Okay, you've heard the rapporteur's views. We'll now put Amendment 16 to the vote. Those in favour, please show. Count those. Better count them. Yeah, that's about what I got. Yeah. Okay, thank you. And those against? And any abstentions? Right. The voting was 23 in favour, 17 against, and 3 abstentions. So Amendment 16 is adopted. We need to now vote on paragraph 43, which has been amended by Amendment 16. Those in favour of the amended paragraph 43? Yeah. Okay. Well, I think. Okay. Anybody against? Any abstentions? Right. Thank you for that. Okay. So paragraph 43 as amended has been agreed to. We're now going to take paragraphs 44 to 47 together. Anybody against taking them together? No. Right. Those in favour of paragraphs 44 to 47, please show. Okay. Thank you. Any abstentions? Right. We're getting there. We're all doing very well, aren't we? Okay. Now we've finished considering the amendments. Thank you for that. We now need to vote formally on the draft resolution as amended by the various amendments we have adopted. Would those in favour of adopting the draft resolution as amended please raise their voting cards? That's the result of this morning's work. Okay, thank you for that. Anybody against the draft resolution? Thank you. Any amendments? Abstentions. Any abstentions? Right. So that has been adopted by 40 votes to 0, which is very good. So thank you for that. We're ahead of time. So that's pretty good. That's not too common. Can I thank you very much indeed for the positive and cooperative way in which you debated all these various items this morning. Thank you for that. We're going to continue the consideration of amendments to the draft resolution and supplementary items. I think it's mainly supplementary items, as we've done the draft resolution amendments. So supplementary items we will debate at 4:30 this afternoon, okay? So you're getting off a bit early. Thank you for being so positive and cooperative, and thank you all. See you at 4:30. And my thanks to the rapporteur and my colleagues here who've kept me in order.